Welcome to another episode of Queer Ecologies. I am Monalisa.
And I'm Adrita, and today we are going to be talking about queer love in the digital age, apps, algorithms, and authenticity, the impact of dating apps and technology in queer relationships and connections.
The moment one thinks of history, one thinks of museums. So I have a question. What would be put up in a queer museum?
Is there enough stuff to be put up in a museum?
I'd like to think that queer history is rich and complex enough to be able to provide something.
Historically speaking, the topic of queer relationships is complex and varied. While modern understandings of sexual orientation and gender identity may not align with the past, one cannot simply ignore the evidence that suggests that all forms of queer relationships have existed through history.
It began like all things do, in Greece. Ancient Greece featured at least 5 different varieties of same-sex relations. They were typically sometimes between adolescent boys and adult men who are not married yet.
Oh, pederastic relationships.
Yes, also between 2 male youths of approximately the same age or between 2 adult men. It could also be between women of different ages or adult females.
Also, pederasty was largely practiced as the age of marriage for men was relatively late.
It also existed among Romans. Do you know about that?
Yes. In the Roman context, conquest and dominance were ingrained as desirable traits, due to which men were free to partake in homosexual relationships as long as they were of differing status. As long as their partner was from a lower class and they held the dominance. But the same cannot be said about a relationship between 2 men of the same social status.
Then there is Hindu mythology, which through its evolved heroes and epics has time and again depicted open rejection or resistance towards the gender binary while displaying elements of gender variance and non-heterosexual sexuality. Oh, that was a tongue twister. For instance, Mohini is the only female avatar of Lord Vishnu, wherein Vishnu takes the form of Mohini when the universe calls for it. Beyond the roles of the savior, the implications in dual genderism and fluid sexuality is more analogical, wherein each person lies in the male and the female.
And I think everyone does know about Ardhanarishwar. Shiva has often been touted as the embodiment of masculinity, and the Ardhanarishwar is a form that is an androgynous composite between Shiva and Parvati.
But then, same-sex relationships were criminalized in Europe.
And how can we not talk about Oscar Wilde?
Yes, Oscar Wilde was put to trial in 1895 with his affair with Lord Alfred Douglas, discovered by Lord Alfred's father, the Marquess of Queensberry. Since homosexuality was illegal in Britain until the 1960s, Wilde's friends had urged him to flee to France, where homosexuality had been decriminalized during the French Revolution.
And did you know about Virginia Woolf? Woolf's intimate relationship with author Vita Sackville-West is frequently overlooked. Instead of using terms such as bisexual or lesbians, the term used by both authors was Sapphist after Sappho. The pair are characterized by the exchange of letters between the two that contain rather lover-like declarations.
And now, after centuries of trial and error, queer relationships have come a long way when viewed in the light of contemporary society. As of today, queer relationships are being legalized by many countries. Queer marriages have also been legalized, though not in India yet.
But compared to what it used to be in the centuries that went by, we can easily state that queer relationships have come a long way.
As we look at things in the contemporary, the dating scene seems to have come a long way from what it was before. Similar to all the so-called developments around us, the relationships have also seemed to be gone digital.
The digitization of love, or queer love, has had a turbulent journey. Of course, the rarity of finding queer soulmates was a solved issue, and finally there came to be a safe space to find oneself a companion.
There was a visible surge in the use of platforms such as Tinder, Bumble, Grindr, etc. As the use of online resources increases the possibility of meeting a potential romantic partner, then doing so through the means of, fate or mutual acquaintances. Online dating also transcends the issues of distance by connecting people simply through notification pings, and they can also share pictures, videos, or have calls which result in a sort of intimacy that doesn't require physical proximity but a simple assurance of someone nearby. The queer community has faced various prejudices throughout time, and the lack of acceptance and the fear of violence is what makes them seek solace through digital devices.
Also, looking through profiles, one can easily draw parallels between likes and dislikes to find similar minded people, which saves them both time and the emotional roller coaster that is otherwise unavoidable with in person meetings. The idea of using these dating apps is to find a significant other, and yet, with the boon of digitization comes also the question of authenticity. All of us sit there in front of our screens with the profiles uploaded, but what ensures the safety of our information and our privacy? Well, there is one thing for sure, and that's how dating apps have somehow solved the issue of distance and location. Being able to communicate with people on your mobile device is certainly a godsend if you either dislike going to social hubs or if you live somewhere where there's not much of an option to rejuvenate.
Well, there's always the question of intimacy. People do have their preferences regarding that, and sometimes it just feels better to physically interact with the person you're in a relationship with.
Yes, but you also have to consider that there has been a shift in how dating apps are being used in the contemporary world. It's not always a place for online dating. You can do that pretty much everywhere, even in online games. But dating apps are used for finding people whom you might match with in close proximity to you.
Absolutely. And since you have brought that up, it would be crucial to mention that the biggest concern that people might have with dating apps now is definitely the privacy and security measures.
This is definitely an apprehension that is common to everyone. I mean, we have certainly heard of cases of kidnapping, even homicide.
Let's not try to scare our listeners today, but your point is valid. These apps do struggle with their security measures. It's not really a matter of user authentication, but a question of what occurs within communication and why we require these safety measures in the first place.
For queer people specifically, staying anonymous or preventing data leaks is particularly crucial when we consider that in several places, anti-queer hate crimes occur within every space, whether it be one's workplace or even in one's home.
I'd also like to bring up the point that in dating apps, the concept of privacy is a bit more lax. I mean, people prefer to disclose certain aspects of their identity and character to attract potential relationships. Posting selfies, pictures, all of these determine, in a superficial sense, whether people choose to swipe right or left.
So when we consider the necessity for sharing information on dating apps, we also have to consider the necessity for privacy at the same time. The biggest issue faced by queer people on these sites are stalking, targeted harassment, and catfishing.
I'd like to take up the point about catfishing. So, it is a common thing which is faced by most people regardless of their orientation. People do lie about their identities, and the entire ordeal tends to cause immense mental distress to the person being catfished, since the degrees of such varies tremendously. The unfortunate aspect about this is that one cannot do much about catfishing except for blocking the user in question. It raises further questions of human ethics and morality. From a technological point of view, it would be difficult to implement a system that could completely combat catfishing.
Catfishing might be one example, but there seems to be a similar argument raised for all other issues concerning dating app privacy. Striking a balance will certainly be difficult. It is very unfortunate that there are instances where the victims are blamed for being open about their sexuality or identity for a crime they deserve to be compensated for.
Additionally, there is also the question of laws that are created and their enforcement. If such a case occurs, the first step should honestly involve the provision of justice to the victim. However, law enforcement is a completely different and pressing concern. Even the question of app design is highly debatable, since in most cases, it's a question of ethics that is at play and not necessarily the application's incompetence.
We can propose certain, not exactly solutions, but precautionary measures for those who are interested in engaging with dating applications. One could potentially register for these apps using a burner email address that is distinct from their primary one. It's useful for both digital threats as well as human threats. One could do the same for their phone number, but it might become a logistical issue at a certain point.
I mean, it would be ideal to turn off anything that would give away one's location. I believe that such things can be configured in the app's settings. Also, being mindful of the pictures you post. Selfies in front of a white wall are all fine and dandy, but ones with your local donut shop on full display would lead to security issues. For outside app contact, Apps with end-to-end encryption like WhatsApp seem to be a safer option compared to an operating system's primary messaging application.
While dating apps can provide a safe space online, an opportunity for community building and allowing visibility to queer population, societal perceptions and stigmas can continue to have a direct impact on app users and their relationships.
Absolutely. Especially within the context of India, heteronormative perceptions and stigmas continue to triumph the dating scene. Overall, society still looks at the dating as a step taken towards finding a perfect partner for settling down. The typical hum do hamare do.
Not that this approach can be considered to be suitable for anyone, but this is applicable even more so among the queer communities. There are many individuals who may register on such platforms looking for just a casual meetup to get to know more people from the community, or with the hope of seeking long-lasting friendships. A long-term relationship may not always be the intention.
However, dating apps may not always be the safe space people need them to be. Social stigmas and ideas like comfort or compulsory heterosexuality can pressure people into suppressing their true identities, which in turn may lead to a fear of coming out.
This fear then gets heavily misused, with multiple reports of people being harassed and abused by dating app users, threatening to out them to their friends and relatives if their demands were not met. These cases are often not logged due to the same fear of revealing their sexuality.
Dating profiles can also have an adverse effect on an individual's self-image and mental health. The ideas of posting one's images, likes and dislikes to be judged by multitudes is a nerve-wracking idea for many.
In a manner similar to social media engagements, not receiving enough swipes, likes or responses to their profiles may not exactly be the most uplifting of feelings.
Then of course, there is the underlying idea of marginalization within the queer communities. Individuals attracted to more than one gender, or even none for that matter, may not always find an inclusive space. This includes a plethora of bisexual, pansexual and aspec identities amongst others.
There is a sense of lack of belonging stemming from the feeling of not queer enough, not straight enough, mostly due to certain stereotypes associated with these identities.
So where do we go from here?
Yeah. To end on a slightly positive note, things are certainly better now than they used to be.
Yes, still bleak, but sure.
There are a lot of dating apps available that attempt to be queer friendly, so there's that.
Yeah, and for all their flaws, they do alleviate some of the anxieties that queer people might be looking when they want to date.
I mean, there is still pretty much everything left to consider, like we discussed thus far.
Yes, but for people who do not want to be outed in their immediate environment, dating apps are pretty much the only means to look for the kind of relationship that they are looking for.
And a report by Tinder finds that LGBTQ plus individuals form the fastest growing community on Tinder, and that LGBTQ plus users have doubled in numbers since 2021 to 23.
Clearly, people are much more comfortable coming out and going out online.
Correct. And 54% of Gen Z users came out online before they did in person, and non-binary users have gone up by 104% since 2022, so...
Looks like things are coming up slowly but surely.
Indeed.
Of course, there are considerations. There are a lot of queer non-mainstream identities that are not adequately considered.
Like ROS identities.
Yes, we covered this in a little too. Aspec identities. Speaking of which, the next podcast is about aspec identities, where we look into the nuances of the spectrum.
Yes, stay tuned for that, and thank you very much for listening.